Okay, we should be live. I will screen share really quick. Go. Okay.
Great.
Joe, do you want to kick us off?
Cool. Sure. Yeah. So as I had mentioned, we started this exercise in the earlier meeting this morning, or wherever your time zone is. What we're doing here is using the responsibilities column as something of a inbox or backlog, and kind of just going through and trying to figure out where these responsibilities fall, whether in the CPC column, the C3 column, kind of a both column, the joint CPC and through C3, and then board as well. But we've been mostly focused on, wherever it ends up lying. But so we can continue going down the list and dropping them in. I have some thoughts about where the line is between these two things, but maybe we'll kind of get into some of those sort of discussions after we continue on the exercise.
Cool.
Great.
So do you want to start at the bottom and then we can go up since it's chronological?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the first one we have is social media resources, which is access to paid tooling, resources on tone, crisis management, etc. My feelings, this is probably under C3, not CPC.
Agreed. And I want to clarify that my understanding of this is hey, projects, if you want help with social media in some way, shape, or form, here's a resource. But it's not hey, projects, here is some required set of tooling, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does editing that to opt in?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah.
That works. I think something just to point out that's really different between the JSF and Node is that our projects really do get a lot of, leeway to do whatever they want with their social channels. So, Grunt runs the Grunt, Twitter and that kind of thing. And that we get that benefit. And that's not been historically the case for y'all, but they'd want to continue to be able to manage it how they are.
Yeah, we have an interesting setup. Go for it.
Oh, no, I just want to say to me, it's one of the requirements of this new foundation that Node.js get the same type of treatment.
Same.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. So we also agree that this belongs under C3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say too, a lot of these responsibilities are kind of in a similar vein, like providing a framework and some guidance more than doing it for them or imposing things upon them. But we can go card by card and kind of highlight that.
Okay.
Cool. Next one is managing developer outreach program. This is added by Miles.
I'm thinking C3 as well.
I am too. Miles, could you I'm not necessarily certain what that would look like. Would you be able to define that a little bit? If you're talking, you're muted.
I think that this was capturing a thought that was said in the meeting by Joe. So it's specifically that could be considered something in line, perhaps with mentoring, but it's just any sort of outreach that we're doing or any sort of developer related stuff. I think that this goes in C3 as well, even though I know it's kind of hand wavy right now.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like the current mentorship initiative that's kind of getting kicked off. This intake pipeline for new dev.
We have a separate card for mentorship, but I think that mentorship is an example of an outreach program.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And there may be other ones like Code and Learn is an example of a developer outreach program, arguably.
As is Node Together.
Yeah.
It might be helpful to capture those kind of examples that y'all are coming up with on the card. So anybody kind of popping in going, what do they mean by that? They'll say, oh, yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah, good call.
that look good?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Code of conduct incident response support.
Yeah, so I popped this in because a lot of the JS Foundation projects are small. The communities are small. They don't necessarily have a whole team of folks on the ComCom or whatever to help with moderation and that kind of thing. And they will, from time to time, or I should assume from time to time, they will need a neutral third party to help support them navigating a tricky situation, for example.
So I was going to say, go ahead, Adam.
No, I was just going to say it's whatever format this takes, like as long as it's in there's a nice escalation channel up to the higher platforms, and we document that well. Like this is it's a support request. Ideally they get to manage it themselves, and we're here to step in as if needed.
I will say, go ahead. Sorry.
Who owns that path who is responsible for coming up with that path?
So for context, one of the things that I think has worked really well in Node, and it's not a direct mapping, but in Node at this point we have the moderation team, which is a team that is not objected to. So none of the members actually have an objection from anyone on the ComCom or anyone on the TSC. And so that could be mapped to joint between CPC and C3, where people on both, where we effectively apply the same process. And so thinking about that, that's a further step, but having it be a joint responsibility would enable that.
This sounds like a subcommittee spun off to handle these specific requests, because not everybody on CPC or C3 will be equipped or want to handle these types of.
So I think with that being said, and a couple things that I could add to this is so if this is scoped specifically to incident response support and not to any sort of policy support or managing things, I actually think that this may fall under the CPC. And the reason why I would say that would be we'll have a reporting structure to an extent here where the CPC is responsible for managing internal projects in the foundation, and code of conduct incidents happen within that scope. So if we think about kind of what happens today within the scope of Node.js, if we had an issue with a collaborator inside of a repo, the repo would try to handle that, but it would then eventually get escalated to the TSC. If there were issues. Now, it could get escalated to the ComCom if it was in the scope of the ComCom. But if we're talking about the general incidents response that would be happening here, if we assume it's scoped to projects, I could imagine a place, especially if these are incidents that involve people who run the projects, that it gets escalated to the CPC itself, since they're responsible for managing the internal projects. But I think broader incident response, maybe it's COC incident escalation falls under the CPC.
Well, I guess I need to step back and just sort of, again, reaffirm where I'm coming from, in terms of writing this down. And let's imagine that we have a smaller project, and I'll pick Grunt again because I just referenced it earlier. And they have which is a small maintainership team. There's an incident either between those maintainers, they have a COC already, and what they are looking for is somebody to come from the outside to perhaps help, ensure that the process they have is being, adjudicated fairly. I don't think that this is a case where I didn't propose this as, hey, here's a project that wants, to follow somebody else's COC escalation path. Here's a project that needs support, tweaking and fine tuning their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that I guess then there's I would separate this into a couple different things, because for example, when we're talking about top level projects, I think we're going to assume that one of the things that's going to be a requirement there would be a code of conduct. In fact, that may even be an entry criteria for the entire foundation. If we're doing that, pardon?
Yes, I think we all understand that. Yeah.
Agreed.
And so if we're doing that, I believe, but correct me if I'm wrong, that those criteria fall under the cross-project council.
Okay. I mean, I could, I think that makes sense. But I just want to point out that, again, for the JS Foundation, there is a requirement that they have a COC, and we ask them to follow the JS Foundation COC. However, if they have their own COC and we feel it meets our criteria, then we will accept that as well. So, I don't know if that's going to be a attitude that the new foundation takes too, or if we're going to say, hey, no, we want everybody to follow the same. I don't know.
And so I would, from that, separate out like kind of code of conduct, like cross-project code of conduct management from incidents response. But I do think resources for managing incidents and stuff, I think that still may fall under, my gut is that it falls under the CPC because it's project management.
Okay. Does anyone have an objection to putting it under CPC for now? And we can revise later if needed.
Nope.
No, I don't.
Nope.
Cool. Next up is marketing, content, and design assistance. I assume this is board. But Joe, like my first read of that may be different. I may have a different interpretation than you have or meant with it.
Just quickly, sorry to interrupt, but should we add another column for foundation supported rather than board? Because there is a difference between the board and the foundation.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely agree with that. And that would make sense for that, at least to me. Does that make sense for you, Joe?
Yes.
Okay.
Makes sense for me too. We've been managing all the newest stuff in the ComCom recently, but like honestly, we should not be responsible for doing this type of stuff. So
I could imagine the C3 being something of a conduit, like projects would maybe come to us and say, hey, how do we do this? But we would direct them to the foundation.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just moved events over to foundation from board.
Yep.
That's good. There's a marketing ticket on your board as well, if you want to move that over.
Is membership also?
I don't know. Membership is a board. Like that's something the board is chartered with.
Okay. And approving charters. Okay, cool. Is this foundation or board? Managing programs to improve inclusivity and diversity.
I think we think that's everybody, but
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's a core value. Like I don't know if that's a program.
Okay. Do we want to dig into that? Do we need a different channel here, or just let that go for now?
I think we let it go for now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Swag. So, sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I had nothing to add.
Okay, cool. Swag production. So, what did you mean by this? Do you mean like actually creating the physical items, or like doing the design part, or which step of this did you intend, Joe?
Looking at the original doc here. Did you add this one, Adam? I can't remember.
You and I worked on a long list, and I think you probably just added all of these. So, but I can like we already have a ticket for marketing, content, and design. So let's consider this swag production like actually getting physical things made, since it'll be overlap. This sounds like a foundation supported program to me. Like it ties in with budget and contracting, and so like that's something we're equipped to deal with.
Okay, cool. Project advocacy. My guess for reading that is C3.
I think the project and the foundation advocacy came up when we were kind of talking about some of the differences between the CPC and the C3. So it's like, I guess there's a difference between advocating for specific projects versus advocating for the foundation at large.
Which one would you assume went in which bucket?
I think I think that project advocacy potentially goes under C3, and foundation advocacy either goes under joint responsibility or foundation.
I would agree with that, and I'd probably agree with the former of joint responsibility.
Same here.
Yeah.
Anyone object to that?
No.
No.
Okay. These are a little bit hard to manage.
Thing, as I said earlier, I would say call it support project advocacy instead of project advocacy, because we want projects to advocate for themselves more or less, while like provide a coordinated effort and venue and stuff like that. While the foundation advocacy is actually like promoting the foundation and its direct. So it's not the same thing.
Is there any objection to doing that? I already changed it, but I can change it back if there is. And that if it. Okay, I'm not hearing objections. Managing scholarship fund. Context, background. Where does this go?
So I think the scholarship fund and the travel fund were stuff where we're talking about things that are budget related. How are they going to be managed? Where are they going to be managed? So for example, I think it goes without saying that the travel fund likely is managed by the CPC, but I think this also starts to tease out a question about if there are budgets, who is responsible for budgets and who manages budgets. And if we start thinking about like who is responsible for managing and asking for budget, it starts to clarify some of the reporting responsibility here. So we may even be able to put those two into like one category, but I think scholarships and travel funds are maybe slightly different. But maybe we could kill scholarship unless someone has an explicit example of a scholarship fund that we may run.
I mean, I can think of a scholarship fund. An example of that is having 10 to 20 tickets to X Foundation Interactive next year for people who come from explicitly underrepresented backgrounds.
I could also imagine, like, there's so many JS community conferences that like seek scholarship money, to be able to support scholarship tickets to their regional events. And I would love for like the foundation to consistently be able to sponsor those kinds of things too. And I think of that as a scholarship fund thing.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that's actually a pretty happy path to the foundation sponsoring conferences without taking into consideration human availability and like people actually being able to go. We might be able to have one person there who's already attending anyway, but we're not necessarily going to be able to send a booth and like people to staff a booth at every conference. But that is a good way to approach that. I would generally agree with that approach, I think.
So would it maybe be safe to put managing a scholarship fund under the C3 and managing the travel fund under the CPC?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Cool. Budget with all the things. I'm guessing foundation.
Budget for what? I mean,
budget for everything. So I really like the trickle down budget concept that Sam introduced a while back. We haven't fleshed it out as far as I know. So this is something that comes from the top down, but the responsibility is divvied up. We were literally just talking about scholarship funds, that budget being managed by the individual top level committees. So this might be too broad of a ticket to actually classify.
Yeah, I think it might be because like each of the things even has like, budget. Like if you look at I-18N, there's budget associated with that and advocating for that. There's budget with access to social media resources, access to paid tooling. Like that might be too broad.
Yeah, I mean, if we do some form of roll up budget process, every single initiative or project could request budget line items that would then get rolled up into the higher levels request. So,
would it be reasonable to maybe change this item from budget to be more explicit? Budget for community and project like initiatives?
We could also spin it to be assistance of the budget process. Like we're going to have some type of budget reporting structure. Do we need to file stuff somewhere?
I think, Adam, you're onto that, something like flipping this from, who is going to be responsible for doling the money to who is responsible for ensuring the community has submitted their budget requests.
Mm-hmm. Kind of that.
Yes, there's like a bottom up thing here, right? Like we need someone who is responsible for asking the foundation for the budget requests.
Yes.
Yes, I think.
I think we.
So.
Yeah, I was repeating what you were saying. Just
okay.
To be clear, I'm not objecting or. And I think perhaps this is a joint responsibility.
I'd actually argue go under foundation. Like we should have someone on staff who's essentially treasurer, who's out there to bug every project to report and make sure that everything that's submitted is in the right format and like the numbers all match up at the end of the day.
So then we're talking about two different things. One is managing the budget and one is requesting the budget, because it wouldn't necessarily be a job of someone from the foundation. Like this is where I think it would be potentially a CPC and a C3 initiative where it's like, on one hand, we need a central place where all of the projects are able to make their budget requests for the year and then have someone get that approved. And then the flip side of it is we then need resources to help make sure that that budget is being maintained and executed on.
So it sounds like we just need to create two items here, or two tickets.
Yeah. And one is the foundation and one's a joint, maybe for right now, just to keep it.
What should the joint, so if I'm editing this to be the...
Creating yearly budget is the one for the joint responsibility. And then managing budget for community, managing community budget.
Okay. Does anyone have objections or tweaks to those? No?
Sounds
okay.
good to me. Other than maybe note in those tickets, like cross-ref those tickets to each other, because whoever is leading each initiative should probably, be best friends with the other. Yeah.
It's hard to do it when we're doing notes because you can literally only have the title.
Fair.
Cool. Next up, run recognition programs.
Yeah, so the JSF has a very short-lived at this point recognition program where we just sort of provide a path for project maintainers to recognize somebody for doing something awesome, and we send them like a t-shirt and a thank you card. And I imagine that's some kind of, we would like to do something like that in the new foundation.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool.
So the question is, where would that go?
I think the security working group is doing something similar for people contributing to that thing, or doing security vulnerabilities and stuff. So absolutely.
Oh yeah, the bug bounty.
Yeah. The bug bounty stuff that we have currently is only for stuff on core and only things that involve remote code executions, and that's run actually by the Internet Bug Bounty. So the IBB itself provides all the budget for that, but we do have the infrastructure in place to do a larger bounty program if we were to raise the funds to do so.
So is Matteo, the security working group is actually sending swag to people who contribute to that, right? Like contribute to vulnerability.
Yes. I mean this process here. Okay.
Yeah, it's so Miles, what Matteo is talking about is different than the actual.
Oh, okay.
Stuff. Although that is a different item that we should probably add is bug bounties for the entire foundation.
Yes, absolutely.
We could add that. That would be fantastic. But so in terms of like a recognition program, basically sending someone a shirt or a hat or whatever, and stickers and stuff like that. It's probably a C3 thing or a foundation thing, one or the other.
I think that's C3.
Okay, cool. Anyone have objections to that?
Not a clear objection, but like when we're talking about things that are bug bounty programs for projects, I personally feel like that would be a CPC initiative.
So this isn't a bug bounty program.
It's not a bug bounty program. It's something
Okay.
really different.
Yeah. This is just recognition, like badges and
yeah. So basically, like, you came in and did this large thing, or you helped out in this way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's basically a gift basket. Okay.
Y'all, I unfortunately am only able to join for the first half of this meeting. I have to go run off to a LinkedIn thing now, but I'm going to try and call in towards the tail end of this. This other meeting typically ends up pretty short, so hopefully I'll see you in like 20 minutes.
Cool. Thank you for joining, Adam.
Yeah, of course.
So moderation. Next up is the moderation training /assistance/ resources, which is something I put in when I was introduced to this this project earlier. So this is kind of riffing off of what we do have in Node, and something I think that would be a valuable opt-in. So not, like you have to have this, but like an opt-in thing program or something that projects can use around, actually understanding and being, Node has actually purchased effectively a training program for moderation around that, and it's going to be rolled out, or it is rolled out to the larger contributor base at this point. So it's available to take if you want to. It's conflict resolution training. So things like that, I think would be a valuable thing for the foundation to provide, whether that's through C3 or through the foundation itself. I think that's a valuable asset for us to provide. Any feelings on where this should go, whether it's under C3 or under foundation? Because I think it's one of those, or it could be joint.
I think that we run into a bit of an issue here when we're talking about what these resources are for and how they're being used. If the cross-project council is the thing that's responsible for managing and running projects and offering the resources to the projects internally, then my gut is that this is actually something that goes under the CPC.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any objection to that?
I have a small objection, which is mostly that my concern is putting this kind of like HR style support and training under the auspices of the CPC. I think maybe doesn't set it up for as much success when it's a real legitimate need. I'm on the fence, but I feel like there's still a strong case to be made for it being a foundation thing.
I don't disagree with that necessarily. I do think that, from the experience that I've had with, the TSC over the past 2 years around that kind of like work, there wasn't a ton of interest in doing that kind of work.
I guess I want to encourage you to not try to think of the CPC as the TSC, though.
No, I know.
It doesn't have it all the same stuff.
Yes, I understand that. But more the people who are attracted to the TSC, and I know that CPC is a different set of people, but I'm not entirely convinced that the CPC, like, that would be part of the interest. And I could be wrong.
Let me reframe it. I think anything that's going to have to do with governance of projects is the responsibility of the CPC hard stop. Now, if we're talking about assistance and training and resources in the way of like nonviolent communication training or those kinds of things that are more resource-based rather than process-based, then I think we are talking about the foundation.
I think this is a resource thing, like, where we've got ostensibly governance and policy in place via the codes of conduct and that kind of thing, an escalation path that the CPC will oversee. But when it comes to providing resources and training like that, are there going to be people on the CPC, with that specific skill set? I don't know, but I would think that it would be more likely to have those skills in the broader foundation community.
Okay, I can get on board with that. I'm good with putting this under foundation.
Okay, cool. I will move it over as soon as I can. Okay, cool. Next up is managing foundation chat forums. Joy, you added this?
I did, after our brief conversation about about chat tools. So the JS Foundation has a Slack channel, and we would like to keep that. We would like to have a combined, foundation chat forum, and who has sort of administrative oversight, make sure that it's being maintained.
Okay. I could see that under CPC, C3, or joint. That's like, given the context Miles shared, I could see that under any of those, or
Same.
foundation as well. Where should this land?
Just not on my
would the foundation essentially own it if it's a foundation Slack?
I think the challenge that we're going to see here, and it might just be out of scope for us to try to put it into a column right now, is that it may be less about managing the forms as much as it is like providing resources. And I will kind of hark back to some of the stuff we've done in the Node Foundation itself. So there's lots of different places where conversations can happen, whether it's Slack or IRC or N number of other places where people are chatting. And we've had many debates about this. And we eventually ended up on kind of deciding that we weren't going to try to manage any of them directly, but rather essentially create a code of conduct, put it under our code of conduct, ensure that foundation approved locations adhered to that, and that there was like clear ways to escalate. But I think trying to give anyone an explicit oversight over managing these is just not going to really be tenable.
How has that worked in the JSF so far, Jory?
Just a handful of different people have admin privileges to make sure folks get invited, or create channels and that kind of thing. And it's just been pretty low fidelity, just because it's not been particularly high traffic, and it's not been an issue. I mean, this doesn't seem to be a problem for anybody.
Okay. So what do we want to do with this card for now? Do we want to put this in a specific column? Do we want to leave it where it is for now, or something else?
It sounds like it might be tied up into like a bigger, I kind of assumed that we would have one, but it may be that there's like an open question about whether we do have one, in which case it should probably stay in responsibilities until we don't take it. I shouldn't assume.
Okay. Any objection to that?
Can you repeat the conclusion one more time?
That it should stay in responsibilities until, until it's like determined that we do have a foundation Slack channel, for example.
Okay, that works for me. And at least the way that we ended up landing on it in the past was just that, at least in Node, there were so many different places. It didn't make sense to try to make a blessed source of truth.
Yeah.
But I'm happy with that living in responsibilities for now.
Cool. And then the final one is support security and responsible disclosure of vulnerabilities, including bug bounties. I assume that's CPC?
Yeah, I +1 CPC for that.
Any objection?
No objection.
Nope.
Cool. Are there any others that we are missing?
Well, I can quickly, what may be helpful is we had that deck.
There was, at some point, we talked about having the CPC promote open standards overall, and have a project chime in into, like, having the new foundation participate into various standard bodies, and having some sort of committee or whatever where feedbacks is being given and so on to the various specs being drafted.
So should we maybe add to the CPC a card that's managing foundation engagement and standards initiatives?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ones that we had on here on the slide deck, just to ensure that we captured all of the ones that we previously had identified. There's identify, recruit, and engage prospective projects that as a responsibility for the CPC. Do we have that currently captured?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
I'm just going to make a card.
Okay,
identify,
cool.
Recruit, and engage prospective projects.
Cool.
Another one that
is that also, and like this is me taking a stab at the dark because I'm just uninformed, is that also partially board responsibility, or is that entirely CPC?
That's entirely CPC.
Okay.
In my personal opinion.
I could see the identify part of that being a joint responsibility, theoretically, but
I think that there's a difference here, and we talked about this on the last call, between who owns the responsibility and who participates in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think we're creating a hierarchy where only the people who have the responsibility can do the work.
Okay.
But it's like at the end of the day, who would be who are we holding responsible for that activity?
Okay, cool.
We have built bottom-up budget requirements to support projects address ad hoc budget needs during the fiscal year. That was under the CPC. That seems kind of like what we identified in creating yearly budget. I'm going to go ahead and just add this text there because it was a little bit more explicit. Does anyone object to what I just added there?
No.
Hmm.
The next thing we had is guide projects into appropriate foundation paths. And I think we already have that captured in decide what projects can graduate to top level. In fact, I would almost say that I like this text a little bit better. Are people okay with replacing decide what projects can graduate to top level to guide projects into appropriate foundation path?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The next one we had to identify and coordinate areas of cross-project technical collaboration. I don't think we have that in there right now. And then the last one that we had on coordinate engagement and standards, we got that. Looking at the future and what is strategic for the projects and JavaScript in general. Do you think that that's one that we should capture?
I mean, ostensibly, that's something that the board should be doing as well. And the CPC, I mean, I feel like that's everybody should be thinking about that. But
so maybe put that as a joint responsibility.
Yeah. Although joint, it explicitly outlines CPC and C3. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't agree that it's a board responsibility, to be honest. I think that there are some bits of that that's strategic, but I would much prefer.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think. Yeah, and one thing that was kind of mentioned in a conversation about this particular topic, an offline conversation, was like who's responsible for perhaps delivering that strategy, not necessarily shaping it and contributing to it, but who's responsible for delivering it.
I have a hard, like, maybe I've not been informed, but would that actually fall under the CPC? Like, if the CPC is internally providing support and effectively a foundation, like not the foundation, but like a layer of support for projects, is that part of their responsibility? Like, is that part of that foundation?
I mean, if we're talking about the technical bit, yes. I guess the only thing where I would imagine that the C3 may come into this and we may want to consider it a joint responsibility is that that may rely on some of the end user feedback and not just on internal aspects of our foundation.
Okay.
But I think it's worth considering too that, like part of this wayfinding exercise is also identifying whether or not both the CPC and C3 are necessary top level committees.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that can also be kind of dug into a bit more. Does anyone object to us for now putting it in joint responsibilities, or should we just put it in the responsibilities category and revisit that afterwards?
I think let's put it in the responsibilities category, because I think there's a really important kind of conversation to have around this card about, what the role of even like the board is and what the role of the project maintainers and communities is. And so I think it should go in responsibilities.
Okay.
Yep, I'm fine with that too.
So with that being said, we move to the next one, which was some of the responsibilities we had here for the C3. Address meta-level concerns cross-cutting with other projects that address interests beyond code contributions in the community. Do you think that that's something we need to capture, or is that a little bit broader and more of kind of a mission statement?
Yeah, I can't actually pinpoint what that even really means, which makes me feel like it's more of a mission statement.
I think the things that we have here for the C3 on this deck, to be honest, are not super capturable right now. So I think we got everything off of that in here, personally.
Okay. Is the Commons.js stuff captured into this?
We have shared resource tooling funding for projects in Common.js under the CPC.
Okay.
Should we review everything really quickly and make sure that we still have consensus on where everything landed?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to drive that, Miles?
Yeah, sure. So under CPC, and I'll just start reading them off, and I'll give a brief pause and just please interject if you have anything to add or you don't think this is out of scope. For the CPC, identify and coordinate areas of cross-project technical collaboration. Identify, recruit, engage prospective projects. Managing foundation engagement. Oh, sorry, was someone going to say something?
Someone raised their hand.
Oh, I can't see that. Oh, I think this is about getting promoted. I'm assuming it's Adam.
Oh, yes, it is. Thank you.
Identify, recruit, and engage prospective projects. Managing foundation engagement in standards initiatives. Managing internal projects in the foundation. I think that we can get rid of this card, to be honest, because I think the other cards that we have, such as guide projects in appropriate foundation bins, identify areas of cross collaboration, managing foundations, I think we capture that and it's a little broad. Does anyone object to us deleting this card?
Which card are you speaking of?
Managing internal projects in the foundation.
I think I read that slightly differently, because I think I was thinking about like, oh, what if there's an open source project that like the CPC collaborates on together, say to provide some enhancement and tooling that benefits all of the projects. That's how I interpreted it, which makes sense.
We have identify and coordinate areas across project technical collaboration as a separate card.
So the only reason I would push for it is because I think it's good to have that net captured, that kind of ellipsis of like, and more.
Okay. Let's just leave it. It's easy enough. Cool. It's not like it's controversial having it there. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't duplicating stuff. Guide projects into appropriate foundation path, common sandbox, top level project, etc. Shared resources, tooling, and funding for projects in Common.js. code of conduct, incident response support, managing travel fund, support security and responsible disclosure of vulnerabilities. One thing that's standing out that I think that we're missing here that I'd like to add would be keeping board up to date with current status of foundation projects. Does anyone object to adding that?
No. Basically a health report I think is useful.
And then I guess representing, one more could be representing, I guess that would maybe be more in like the job of the CPC board rep, so we can tunnel into that later. So for the C3, we have managing external initiatives of the foundation. Developing a framework for community end user feedback. Managing program to offer mentorship to external individuals. Opt-in social media resources, access to paid tooling, resources on tone, crisis management, etc. Managing developer outreach program, mentorship, code and learn, node together. Support project advocacy, managing scholarship fund, run recognition program. For joint responsibilities, we have decide what projects can join the foundation. I think that this is one that maybe we should drill into a tiny bit, because we did have, consensus initially that this was a joint responsibility, but in going through the responsibilities of the C3 and comparing the responsibilities to the CPC, it seems like it would more be a CPC responsibility for deciding what projects can join, and the C3 would more be an advisory capacity to the CPC in that. Do people have any feelings about that?
I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't necessarily wholly agree, but I don't disagree. So
I'm going to move that over to the CPC, and I'm going to add a card to the C3 for.
I would actually add a card into the C3 so for me, we have a card on the CPC that identify, recruit, and engage prospective projects. Yeah. And that, for me, it looks more a task for the C3.
So should we move the identify, recruit, and engaging to joint responsibilities?
Yes, I would say it's probably.
I would agree.
And then we can remove that card about advising, because then that becomes a joint effort.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yep. Yes.
Community cultivation, advocacy, advice, and support. This is a joint responsibility.
Is that a responsibility or a value?
This is responsibilities.
Okay. But I'm saying that specific thing. I'm not sure if that's something that it's not a value, but it seems like something that should be inherent, which I guess it's good to write down. So never mind.
I think it's good to write down. I mean, just to give you some context, just last week I had a project, reach out for, half hour or so of my time just to talk about different, ideas and strategies for how they could grow their contributor base. Just that, providing that space and path for folks to get just connected with somebody who will listen to them and give them time and ideas is great.
Awesome.
I personally can very much imagine times where both, the technical, the CPC and the C3 would be useful depending on the context.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool.
I-18 advocacy, advice, and support. Manage programs to improve inclusivity and diversity. Foundation advocacy. And creating yearly budget. Under the foundation, we have marketing, content, and design assistants, events, marketing, swag production, managing community budget. I'm gonna, yeah. So what I would like to do is, rather than C creating yearly budget, whatever, I'll revisit that afterwards because we can create direct links. I'm also about to be kicked out of my meeting room as a heads up. I'll try to find another room if we want to run late. And the last one we have on here is moderation, training, assistance, and resources. For the board, we have managing programs to improve inclusivity and diversity, legal, strategy.
So one question I have, that ticket or that item is duplicated in joint responsibilities of CPC and C3. Yeah, do you want to create a link between those?
You know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go take that and put it under responsibilities as a whole.
Cool. Okay.
And let's remove the duplicated card.
Cool.
And then we can come through and we can revisit those ones that we think are actually just like the whole foundation's responsible for, right? Yeah. Legal, strategy, membership, budget, approving charters, entity management. What I like about what we've done here too is it makes it really clear that the board's not really doing anything exciting. I'm gonna have to run and find another room. Are people able to run a little later on this meeting, or do we have a hard stop in 1 minute?
I have to drop, but I was just gonna actually just typing that in. Thanks everybody for the chat today.
Thanks, Jory.
I will let you go.
I can go.
I'm going to find another room and maybe we can do even just like 5 minutes. I just don't want to be rushed at the end here. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
So as a quick aside, is there, after reading this, is there anything specific that you feel like, you were thinking of or that you assumed would be a responsibility in this, or, just anything that we've left out? Okay. I don't know if there's a ton else, but I do think that I think that this provides us a very good roadmap and actually a very good justification for each of these groups and a good way to begin to approach each of these things and how we need to structure them. This is, I feel like something I'm glad we're doing this because it's giving me at least more insight. I don't know if it's helping y'all, but it's helping me.
Yeah, it's definitely helping. I wonder if we want to open up the floor to, people's thoughts about 2 councils versus 1. Just curious.
So I take the floor a lot, so please take it away from me. If you want to say something.
So let me say something. So
go ahead.
So I take the floor off you. I think having one, so it's a huge amount of work, okay? And we all know that meetings and discussions, when they go over a certain number of people, becomes very ineffective. So I kind of prefer having maybe 2 groups that are tight, that are smaller than one big group that includes enough people to actually do all those tasks.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm more or less I'm finished.
Back. Sorry about that.
Hey Miles.
Hey Miles. So yeah, I that is my idea. Now, if we have one big entity and then that is split into subcommittees or something, that could also work. So overall, as long as it's recognized that it's too much work for like a single group of people and a single group of volunteers, and that is like having 1 or 2, it doesn't change much.
Yeah. I've been trying to keep an open mind to the idea of only one top level council or committee, but I think this exercise has made it clear that it is a lot of work, And I do think that the community, it's good to have the community focused group, for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and I would. So, Miles, for context, we're discussing. Joe brought up whether kind of temperature gauging on one group versus two, so CPC and C3 versus just CPC or whatever acronym that would take. I very much
that one more time. My connection dropped.
So no worries. That might have been my connection. We're discussing, the possibility of one group versus two, and kind of gauging the temperature on that and how we're feeling about that after this discussion and this kind of exercise. So my feeling, like, I was warming up to one, but looking at this. There are kind of two sets of responsibilities here, two distinct sets of responsibilities, and then the ones that would be shared between them. And I think those sets are very logical, and I'd not seen these things laid out explicitly previously, and so I think that. Looking at it, how we are in this project board, it makes sense to me to have two distinct ones. The only concern I would have, and I've heard some others echo this as well, is human power of being able to actually staff these appropriately. Like, are we going to physically be able to get enough people to participate in both of these? I can see it happening. But I need to have more confirmation from the people, or the groups and the people, that I can see it happening, or being the source of that. And I don't have that confirmation that they would be able to engage, or that they would be able to invest in that.
So I guess
that's my biggest concern.
I guess one of the thoughts that I have here, and it's worth, I think, considering, especially the way that we do it, when we're talking about things being chartered by the board, it's being chartered by the board because they're taking on explicit responsibility that actually may tie to like legal responsibility of a foundation. So looking at the things that are CPC specific, I really feel like it could kind of be boiled down to that the CPC is like really focused on technical projects and visions and acting as a gate for quality assurance on new projects coming in and on projects graduating. For a set like this, it's important that the people who are responsible for this have earned credibility and that they have the trust of the foundation to execute on it. Now, the flip side of it, a lot of the things that we're looking through in the 3C initiatives here, and I'm not saying that these are not important for the foundation, I don't feel like they have the same scale of like needing that trust layer or necessarily even that explicit chartering. Even further, I mean, if we look at the way in which we've done things in Node, there's no reason why those initiatives, each of those initiatives themselves, couldn't be their own groups chartered by the CPC to do it. So mentorship, for example, could be its own program. Community user feedback could be its own program. And I think the question then becomes, when we're thinking about who are the groups and who are overseeing it and who are overseeing the initiatives, I think the C3 makes sense if we think that there are going to be enough of those initiatives and enough stakeholders that we need a higher level body to kind of cross coordinate across all of them, because it's important for them to be able to communicate. But if these different programs are kind of standalones and it isn't as important for them to cross collaborate, if, for example, mentorship and social media management and IETNN are disparate enough that they can be their own smaller initiatives, I don't know if they're actually, I don't know if it's a benefit for us to introduce extra governance and extra oversight into them being able to do their things. And especially when we start looking at things like the Commons.js or the standards initiatives that we want to be doing, those are also, like, in theory, things that the CPC may not be explicitly managing, but chartering out to other groups. Like, I could very well see, for example, open standards in particular being its own standalone program that has its own governance and its own management and is chartered by the CPC. And so I guess the question there would be, I think there is a lot of value in having these initiatives that have a lower barrier to entry, that have less time necessary to commit and build trust before you can hit the ground running and be an effective participant. I think that is one of the really beautiful things that the ComCom offers. And I think it's important for us to make that like a first class thing, but there is that balance between introducing unnecessary friction and empowering. And I'm on the fence about where we're at on it.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you on introducing unnecessary friction. I experience this pretty regularly in the level of friction that we have in Node. There's a lot of unnecessary barriers there. So, I'm entirely with you on that. And, I think to your point of like, is there value, the value proposition getting into that kind of field for the CPC, or sorry, the C3 would be effectively ensuring that these initiatives are able to communicate and work together effectively, and like facilitating that effectively.
Mm-hmm.
The three you mentioned, I definitely see those needing to or benefiting greatly from interaction and from that facilitation. Mentorship and the social media kind of opt-in social media resources, those are very valuable together.
But the opt-in social media resources are going to be useful to every project in the foundation, not just
true.
Like, and that's where it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, is it a divide that we need? I also want to step back for a second. And I think that perhaps we shouldn't be diving in too much further on these without bringing in more stakeholders, especially Tracy, who I know has a lot of opinions and view on this, especially since she's done a lot of work building out the ComCom. So perhaps since we've gone over in time, like, should we punt this to next week?
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Yes.
Good discussion, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I personally, and I would love if anyone has like 5 minutes to kind of debrief. Like, did people find this exercise effective? And do you find the way we've got things laid out now a little clearer?
Yeah, and I think it makes it easier for other people to come in too and take a look at what we've done and help them to formulate an opinion as well. Like, if we could ask Tracy to take a good look at it, or anyone else that wants to come to the discussion, I think it makes sense.
I found a lot of value in this. Like, it's significantly better than either a README doc or like some kind of markdown file or an issue. This is a lot easier for me to manage in the time I have, consume, and to be able to kind of engage with it in the time I have available to do this, compared to how we've done things previously. So it's also just a generally good way to kind of organize these thoughts and ideas and be able to tweak them in a modular way. So I appreciate this greatly.
So I've done one thing really quickly in which I put the ones that we didn't have consensus on, specifically the managing foundation chat rooms, in a TBD category. We could change the name of it if we want. I just put the other one, managing programs to improve inclusivity and diversity, and looking at the future and what was strategic for the projects in JavaScript in general in everyone.
Sounds good.
Does anyone object to that?
Nope, sounds good.
Cool. Just
so
because
what are next steps? Go ahead.
I think next steps is I'm going to go and, I think maybe we should put a summary of this and send it to the ComCom, the TSC, and the JSF tag, and likely their projects as well as the board. I can maybe take an action item on putting together a summary like that and sending it out.
If you don't mind, or if you want to offload it, I can help.
Okay, cool. Other than that, I think, we have the meeting next Monday, and I think that, we possibly can jump into next Monday reviewing this and then kind of having a discussion, maybe making that harder discussion about one versus two groups. I think the other thing that's worth considering in here as well is when looking at these, like, so for example, when looking at these groups and thinking about why would we need a board rep, what the board rep is accomplishing. And so, for example, if we have here in joint is creating the yearly budget. If creating the yearly budget becomes a responsibility of the CPC, for example, and the board's responsible for budget, and the CPC now becomes a place where any project, including any C3 initiative, can go to get their budgets approved, then do we need a board rep on the C3? And I think, like, I'm just staging that as like a very loaded way of framing it, but I think we can maybe work backwards from here and figure out, hey, like in this setup where this is the board's responsibility, why do we then need board representation, and who is the most appropriate to have board representation based on that? And I think no matter what, I don't think anyone's saying that we shouldn't have 3 seats. I think some of the difference is it 1 for the CPC and then 2 that get split between all the projects? Is it 1 for the CPC, 1 for the C3, 1 for all the projects? Whatever it is, I think that's one of the big next steps that we need to ask. And I think if we have the answers to A, how many top level committees are there and what the board representation is, that's the only things that we need consensus on to draft the primary foundation bylaws, aside from a bit about the project progression. But even then, I think it's fine because the CPC could be chartered by the board to manage that. And then it just becomes like, that's things we can work out in our governance that's not necessarily part of the charter.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm really excited. It feels like we're really close.
Yeah, agreed.
It does.
I was thinking the same thing. Great.
Yeah.
Stephen, you've been on this call the whole time and really silent. I know that's likely because your legal support. But do you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to add before we end the call?
I mean, I guess the only thought that I would share is that, sort of as someone who's a little bit of an outsider but has been on all of these calls, I'd say this is sort of the most distilled, productive hour that I've sort of seen in this process. And I think that this process certainly, and the document that you guys are putting together through this, certainly gives us lawyers a better roadmap as we're putting together documentation. So the more you can continue in this vein, the better for me, certainly.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, so I guess we're good to convene. Tierney, thank you so much for chairing and moderating this.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thank you, Tierney. Are there any questions from YouTube? I don't know if anybody looked at the streaming at all.
I can look. Give me 1 sec. Nope, just someone said hi. So
Great.
cool.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.